I know for certain some of them are my grandfather's because I got them from my aunt rather than my father. So she had them. So what I'm going to start with first, I'm going to take it that you've never encountered anything about coopering or barrels or whatever. So I'll start with the timber and the types of timber we use. The two types of timber we use here in Midland is American white oak and the European white oak. You can't use red oak, for example, because if you use red oak, it's got the veins in it and it would just literally pour out the bottom. Okay? And these are things that are discovered over centuries, over trial and error, trying different timbers, see what works and what doesn't work. Not just in the distilling side of things or the brewing, but also in goods such as storing apples, jams, or whatever. Okay? So, generally speaking, in the brewing industry and distilling industry, white oak was always used. In maybe the dry goods, such as apples or whatever, you could use pines, you could use cedar, whatever was local. The other quality with white oak is the way it can breathe and it can leave the air passing in and out. Okay? You don't really get that property with any other timber. It does happen with other timbers, but not to the same degree. Plus, the tannins, vanillas, and other ingredients in the oak that you want to get into the whiskey. So you get that interaction with the air going on, with the whiskey and the outside, but you also get a loss of whiskey, what we call maturization loss, or what we sometimes call the angel share. So that we have that loss of whiskey out through the cask, and when you go to a warehouse in a minute, you'll feel how cold it is in a warehouse, and that's the evaporation of whiskey still going on. So you get about 2% loss a year. So after a typical 18-year-old, for Jameson 18, you've got about 42% loss in the cask. So it's quite high. The other thing with the timber is the way it's cut. It's what we call quarter-sawn. But you've heard that before. So the log is cut to size, and then it's quartered, and then cut at this angle, or near enough to this angle. So what you're looking for is you get these rings going at 90 degrees to the board. Okay? And when you get that, you get a lot more strength. And the strength is what you're looking for when you bend the cask. If you were just to plank it, when you go to bend it after, you start to get a lot of breakages and a lot of cracks. And we still get cracks, of course, in the timber, being timber what it is, but not as many. Now, the early guilds that were set up, mainly throughout Europe and England, one of the first stipulations in the guilds for coopers was that all casks for brewing or distilling had to be quarter-sawn. If they weren't quarter-sawn, if you were to cheat and make your cask from plank timber, you could be thrown out of the guild, and then you couldn't apply your trade as a master cooper. You would have to work under a master cooper forevermore, and he would keep an eye on you to make sure you kept the quality right. So, in a sense, it was an early form of kind of ISO, quality control. So that was the early guilds were set up for that reason. The same happened with guilds in blacksmithing, in jewelry making, whatever. It had a lot to do with quality and ensuring the standard of what you made. So that was one of the stipulations with coopering, that it had to be quarter-sawn. The problem with quarter-sawn, it's very wasteful. You've got a lot of timber that you're not going to use. So it's an expensive cut. For example, if you were to buy quarter-sawn floorboards in the States, which is about the only place I've seen them advertised, you'd have to specially order them here in Ireland, but you'll see them regularly advertised in a lot of the American woodworking magazines, stuff like that. About 3 times the price as opposed to a planked oak board. But what you're going to get when you do that is you're going to get this beautiful grain coming out. You might see it a lot maybe in panelled walls, oak furniture. It tends to be all quarter-sawn, because what they want to try to achieve is get this beautiful grain, this medulla res or fleck coming out. Whereas if you plank it, that's more or less what you're going to see. So the next time you're watching a piece of oak furniture, whatever, you'll see this beautiful grain coming out, you know. So any questions with the timber or
you said that contributes to its, would you say, like malleability or bendability? Yeah,
when you quarter-sawn it contributes to its strength. Because you're going against the rings of the tree, it's a lot stronger. Whereas if you go with the rings and plank it, it's a lot more flexible which is fine for some.
I see.
But for a barrel, you want the strength going on. And the other thing that the oak is, as I said, it's breathability, in that it can let air pass in and out with a lot of whiskey, a lass of whiskey going on as well. All right. So again, to come to the tools, you'll probably see a lot of the same tools around the industry throughout the world. But what changes are the names. Because the craft is sold, a lot of the names developed independently, and some tools even developed independently. Like here in Ireland, a good few of the tools that we have are called after animals. You may find some of the tools in Scotland called the same, but I know for a fact some of them are called different names. When I say animals, this particular tool here is for pulling back the staves. And what I mean by staves are the long vertical pieces. So if you were to pull back a stave on the top of the cask, by pushing it in like that, you grab it to pull it back. But as you can see by the shape, it's kind of got almost 2 ears. So we call it a dog. Now if any of you have ever done any bit of carpentry or woodworking, holding tools on benches are still called dogs. So it's still a common tool used an awful lot. I like to think that this is probably where it's got its name, because you can see it kind of resembles somewhat like a dog. And if you want to pick up any of the tools in a minute and take photographs, by all means do. Another tool I have here, like I know in Scotland they call this a downright, but here we call it a swift. Because it's got kind of 2 wings on it, it represents a bird almost. And a swift is a type of swallow. And it's used as a type of spoke shave on the head of the cask to shave it flat, so that when you glue your pieces, or you dowel your pieces together, you might have slight rises or whatever. So in order to shave the whole thing flat, you would use a swift. Another tool that's used would be a crows, and it's a type of router. It would really be somebody in the woodworking industry who know what a router is, but it's to cut out a groove. So in the stave, on top of the stave, you've got this groove. So in order to cut that out, you plough a little channel with the crows. Okay? And even the parts of the crows, these little points here, are called hawks. Again, the name. So the hawks cut first, so that you don't have any tear in the oak, and then the blade behind it cuts it. So even at that level, you still have names of animals. And the groove is necessary for the head of the cask, top of the cask, to fit in like that. So that when you chamfer both sides, and then you put it together, you can see how it fits almost, you know. So again, with the technology, or with coopering itself, it's the first indication of coopering is about 1900 BC on the hieroglyphs. It's the first evidence of coopering. So it goes back almost 4,000 years. So the very dawn of distilling, along with the dawn of coopering, you know, the Egyptians were the first to almost distill in the making of perfume. So the two have kind of worked hand in hand all down through the centuries. These tools obviously are compass, but we would make our own compasses here. And the beauty about these is the way, when you set it, just by turning it, it stays set. So you would have different compasses for different sized casks. This particular one would have been used for a firkin. And a firkin is about that size up on the anvil. And here in Cork, we had a big tradition of making firkins for the export of butter and cheese. And one of the famous buildings in the city is called a firkin crane. And around the 1850s, coopers were making about 5,500 firkins by hand every week for the export of butter throughout the British Empire. So come back to the compass. If you were to go around the inside of the cask at the top 6 times, and this is probably more the size, so you go around 6 times, that gives you your circumference, so that's your exact measurement. And essentially this is your only measuring tool when you're making a cask. To get your size of cask, when you make it round, what we call a master hoop. So that particular hoop is for that size of cask. So you would have one master hoop for a barrel, You have another master hoop for a butt, and at your size. Now there is a way of measuring how much a cask would hold through dividers, but that's essentially what you work with all the time, is one set master hoop that is hung on the wall and is only used for making a cask. And then it's put back in the other hoops are used to tighten it. So that's how you get your sizes. So the compass gets the head size. The other tools in making a stave would be these knives. Still fairly common. You'll still see them used a lot throughout the world in America for making chair making the spins on chairs, traditionally speaking. Stick making, walking sticks. People still like to use traditional methods. So you would call it a draw knife, or a backing knife I would call it, for backing the stave. So making the back of the stave round, this part, I'd use a backing knife. For the inside of the stave, to make it hollow, I use what we call a hollowing knife. Now, funny thing is, a lot of the tools went over to use in other crafts. I mean, a backing knife is still, for example, used in the logging industry for making log cabins. They strip off all the bark using a backing knife by hand in order to get it all off. A machine will do so far, but in order to get it off, to keep that beautiful log look, they still use a backing knife. But a hollowing knife was only used in coopering. It was the only trade that needed something of that shape. And again, these are my grandfather's, because my aunt gave me these. So again, depending on the size that you wanted, smaller tools or smaller casks. This particular is called a round shave, we would call it. And it's just, again, a scraping tool. So in order to scrape maybe down the staves to even them up, and can be still bought off the shelf. You might see them advertised in England. They're still very commonly used. Again, in traditional furniture making and stuff like that, using hand tools only. For the top of the cask, in our state, to get it flat, I would use a plane. I would use a topping plane, but you can see the shape is almost the shape of the cask. Anyone got any questions? Are we doing okay?
Yeah.
Other tools, for example, this tool would have been used as a scribe. So traditionally the cask would have been weighed and numbered. So you would scribe your dimensions on the cask, for example, a number. So by pulling that, you will get a 1. By scooping it, you get a circle. So you can nearly do every number or letter by using a scribe. So on older casks, you might still see them around, you can still see the scribes done. Still used a lot in Spain and stuff, I think, on the side of casks. To come to the tools on here, what I have here is a nads. And it's used for chopping, mainly used on the top of the cask for creating the chamfer, but it can be used for paring on other parts of the cask as well. Very ancient design tool. I mean, if you can imagine that it would have been, say, a flint tool. So kind of the 3 tools that are developed in mankind's history would have been a hammer, an axe, and an adze. So basically what an adze is, it's an axe turned sideways. So instead of the handle coming this way, the handle's coming up. So, and the reason I say in mankind's history is that the 3 tools developed independently throughout different cultures without ever meeting. Like North American Indians on the East Coast had an adze, a stone adze. They would have had a form of axe and obviously a form of hammer. The Maori in New Zealand, whatever, had a form of adze made from giant clams. So again, these 3 tools developed throughout history. And as you know, with an axe, they come in all shapes and sizes. The adze is kind of probably forgotten a lot now. But again, it's still used with a lot of the traditional hand tools for cabinet making, for chair making, stuff like that. The last tool here is a Cooper's axe, broad axe. Usually when I show this to people, they kind of say, you know, what a bit of a weapon or whatever, but it's actually a very clever tool in the way it's designed, in that the blade being flat, the handle is splayed away from the blade, so that when I cut the stave, when I carve the stave by hand, I don't clip my fingers. The other thing is the bevel on the blade is only on one side. so that it shaves timber away. If you've got the bevel on both sides like a normal axe, it's just going to split, which is what a normal axe would do. It would have been a very common tool, say up to 100 years ago in the logging industry, especially places like Canada and stuff like that, where a lot of the logs were prepared with an axe rather than a saw. Very long handle, and they would square the log using an axe. So, you know, down through history, it's been a very common tool. The last few tools I have that I would use would be, say, Cooper's hammer, and what we call it a driver. And this drives the hoops down. But you got to hold it in a special way. If you hold it like that, you could clip your fingers very easily, do severe damage. So you've got to hold it like that so that if you miss, you won't do any damage. So I'm going to demonstrate most of the tools I have here in a minute. And again, the last tool I have here is a hammer. That was given to me by an old friend that I worked with for many years. I asked him when he was leaving actually for it. And he left it in my box. He didn't even get to me. He was kind of going to keep it because it meant so much to him as well. But it was his father's hammer and his own hammer their entire working lives. And over 2 generations, they never changed the handle. So the handle wore to the shape it's in now. So it took 80, 90 years to get it to this level. Whereas you can see we've a long way to go on this hammer. So the other thing that I tell people as well about the hammer is that, and I suppose it's somebody in the trade would recognize it, or when you recognize a worn step, you can imagine the wear and the people who've walked over it. Same with a hammer in that there's no wear whatsoever on the hammer. And that's not through lack of use. It means perfect technique. So every time he made contact, he hit it right on the ball of the hammer. If he didn't, or his father didn't, they'd have snapped the hammer a long time ago. And also they'd have worn the hammer. Whereas you can see on this hammer, which was belonged to another Cooper, was about 25 years old, you can see the wear from improper use. Because every time he hit something, he hit it sideways. Now what that shows as well is that with proper technique, no injuries. In other words, you don't get tennis elbow or you don't get a shoulder injury over a long period of time. So this chap probably would have ended up with tennis elbow or whatever if he kept with the same technique. So it's like any trade or profession, you know, basics, good techniques will serve you your lifetime and your tools will last indefinitely. So if there's any other questions before I go with the tools, by all means, if you want to pick any up,